So the Land Rover's pretty much done, as in done enough that I need to get it certified and registered, i.e. legal to drive on the road. So in Australia, if you modify a vehicle, change the engine to a different type of engine, change how many seats it's got, change the brakes, certain things trigger a thing where you have to go and get it engineered and certified. That modification has to be certified. So obviously that applies to a vehicle that you've converted to electric from petrol or diesel. So I'm in New South Wales, Australia, so I have to use a certifier that can certify it for New South Wales rego. So it's a good idea, even before you've started anything, to check the regulations on what you have to do. Also too, it's good to contact the certifier beforehand too. Have the certifier come along for the ride if you like. They don't like you just bringing a car at the end when you finished everything saying, oh, here's what I've come up with. And I've sort of done, well, I have done that. Before I took this off the road at the start of the year, I contacted the engineer I want to use, told him what I was doing. My main question for him back then was, at what stage do you need to look at the vehicle? And we sort of talked about that. And the main things were, he needs to see like how I've mounted the motor. He needs to make sure it's strong enough. Same with the battery. But there's nothing that he can't see after I've done it. So he hasn't actually looked at the vehicle yet, but at least I've contacted him and I'm not just taking the vehicle to him, you know, saying, oh, I've just done this, what do you think? In Australia, modifying a vehicle, they use VSB 14, Vehicle Standards Bulletins, and they have different sections. This is for tyres, rims, suspension, steering, and it's just guidelines, code of practice for modification. It's riveting reading. Not really. It's a good idea, obviously, to download them. You can just go to New South Wales Transport webpage and download them all. It's got one for brakes, and it's also got one specifically for the installation of electric drives in motor vehicles, i.e. doing an EV conversion. So I read this before I started. So I had an idea. It's good to have an idea. Like it's got things like, high voltage cables have to be orange. And I've also gone through it again after I've done most of the things, because it's sort of useful to look at it again because you know exactly how you've done it then. So this was written back in 2011. So it's a bit old. This is, it's 2024 now, so this is 13 years old. So it sort of needs to be redone. There's some weird things in here that even back in 2011 don't make sense. For instance, I've gone to hazardous voltage disconnect. Section 2.10. The power on procedure must be applied via a key switch. Okay. In the past, most cars have a keyed ignition switch, don't they? To start it. And quite often, in a conversion, you tend to just reuse that to turn the car on and off. But if you know Tesla, there is no keyed switch in a Tesla. 99% of the time, this is the key. It's Bluetooth to the car. So you just walk up to it. So I guess you could interpret that as a key switch. But the problem with that is it's the power on procedure. Teslas just power on all the time without a key switch. Charge a 12-volt battery, check for over-the-air updates. As far as a Tesla goes, that doesn't work. Let's read the next line. It must not be possible to remove this key in any position that energises the drivetrain or makes active driving possible. That doesn't actually work for a Tesla either, because even if you're using a key card, you sort of just need to use the key card to put it in drive, and then you don't need the key card anymore, so you can actually just drive it without that key card then. Disconnection of the traction pack from the rest of the traction circuit must be by a contactor operated by the ignition switch. Ignition switch? That should never apply to an electric vehicle. Look up the definition of ignition. Ignition is to set fire to something or to energise the ignition of fire in an internal combustion engine. So this is in the electric drive guidelines. not the just general guidelines. So there can never be an ignition switch in an electric vehicle. So that wording is totally wrong. Toggle switch may be installed to enable the driver to shut down the battery supply without resorting to turning off the ignition key, as switching off the ignition will also disable services such as brake boosters. Yeah, they need to reword this. Further down, the vehicle must not be capable of being driven in either direction if the ignition key switch is not in the on position. So in a Tesla, in the center console there, it's got a vehicle security module, VSEC it's called. So you can use your key card to activate that, but it's not an ignition key. You need to use the vehicle security system through your phone or through a card to make driving possible, to put it into drive. If you don't have any of that, you can't put it into drive. But the drivetrain is energised. In fact, I don't know. Actually, let me just show you now. This Tesla here does not have the drivetrain energised. Every so often it does turn on. Actually, is the Land Rover turned on? Don't even know. No, they're both asleep. I can wake it up though, if I just do that. There it goes. It's energised. That click is the contactors energising it. Is that a keyed ignition switch? It's a keyed switch, maybe? I don't know. What else we got in here? So it's got a thing on regenerative braking. This is more of a guideline. So that's because it uses the word should. As a general guideline, regenerative braking should not exceed the deceleration levels generated by the original internal combustion engine. At least it says should, because that's dumb. Like, obviously regen's going to be more than the original, well, you'd want it to be more than the original diesel engine, because that's an awesome feature of an electric vehicle. So, but at least it just says it's a guide. Like, that's a good guide to ignore, but at least it's not a must. Other things, speedometer. The accuracy, I mean, this makes sense. The accuracy of the speedometer, vehicle speedometer, must be maintained and continue to comply with the applicable ADR. If the vehicle's original overall gearing or speedometer drive has been changed, the speed indicated by the speedometer should be no less than the vehicle's actual speed and no more than 10% above the actual speed. My speedo in the Land Rover, because I've changed the gearing, is I've worked out it's about 12% out. That doesn't comply, but I've made another display there with a calibrated speedometer, so that's got around that. How am I going to get around that keyed ignition switch? The only way I can activate the Land Rover is with a key card, as in drive it. I can switch it on, but I can't drive it without the key card. And I've put the key card module, the VSEC, vehicle security, just here. So technically I don't have a keyed ignition switch. I mean, obviously I'm going to have to chat to the engineer and see what he thinks, but I've got a backup plan. It's just a keyed switch. I'm not going to make it so it ignites fire, even though technically that's what it wants me to do. But I thought I'll just make up this stupid keyed switch and I'll probably just put it on the ground of the high voltage controller. So you can see that wire there is the ground for the logic for the high voltage controller. So if it doesn't have a ground, it can't energise the contactors and have high voltage. So, I mean, the other thing you can do is just pull that. It's not a keyed switch though, is it? The other problem with that whole keyed switch, let's get over the ignition part of it. It's obviously just a misspelling. How do you charge an electric car without the high voltage pack being connected? You can't. When you're charging, you don't want to have to sit in the car with the key in it, with it on. At a fast charger, you want to go get some food. The whole thing doesn't make sense, but anyway. It's also a transmission section, so this is just for general modifications. It doesn't relate to electric vehicles, it's just, for all vehicles. Reverse lights must only operate with the ignition on. That's another ignition. I mean, that makes sense with most conversions, because most conversions in the past have been for, petrol, and you do have ignition, but they're going to have to reword that too, because most conversions now are going to be electric. So I'm happy with the stage the vehicle's at as far as going getting it engineered and registered, that sort of thing. Other than the front prop shaft, which I ordered back in June, 5 months ago. Jesus, that's taken a while. So I'm using the original front prop shaft, which I don't like. It doesn't sound great. It's got a bit of play in the unis and the spline. Not a lot, but it's also on more of an angle. So I've ordered a double cardan uni joint to get around that, but it's taking ages. Rather than just waiting and waiting and waiting, I've booked it in with the engineer, because the engineer, I found out, was booked out a couple of months in advance. And I thought, well, I'm definitely going to have the prop shaft by then. As it turns out, I may not. Oh, look, the Tesla just turned off without an ignition switch. Did you hear that click? I have no control over that. One thing I have to do, one thing that the engineer needs though, is a weighbridge certificate. So the next question is, how do I get this to the certifier and to the weighbridge? So I was sort of thinking I could get a tilt tray, bit of a hassle, like we don't live in town, we live 30 k's out of town. Can I get an unregistered vehicle permit? I can't, because it's registered. It's not registered as an electric vehicle, it's registered as a diesel. So theoretically I can't just drive it around until it's certified. But it does say on the website, you're allowed to drive it to a certifier. You have to take the most direct or convenient route. So that's fine. It's 550 k's. They don't say there's a limit on how far you can drive it. And you can drive it to the weighbridge. So that's what I'm going to do. Also too, it'll be good to drive it to the weighbridge before I drive 550 k's up to Newcastle, to make sure that it's going to be okay to drive all that way. I'd also like to check and make sure that it fast charges as well. So that's the next step.